one of the hardest things for a prospective storyteller to do is simply start. In fact, in many areas of life, beginning anything is often a difficult endeavour. And yet, in order to reach our goals, to bring that end we envision to fruition, we must somehow overcome the doubt and uncertainty that stays our hand, or risk sacrificing our dreams for the fleeting solace of inaction. And then, we begin. We create the story and we decide it shall be a trilogy, a tale told in 3 parts. The first reaches our audience and we have no idea how they'll react. They love it. They're astounded and amazed and anticipating more. Well, we have more in store. So then we release the sequels and now they're telling us this is even better than the first. Invigorated and inspired by this reception, we now bring forth the final part of the story. But, well, it's all going so well, isn't it? They just handed us 4 Emmys with top charts globally and have produced one of the most iconic stories in modern media. Sure, we were meant to stop in this final installment, but look at how much we have going on. It isn't what we planned, but surely we could just make it up as we go, right? The audience wants more, the investors want more. Why not indulge and give them what they want? We could. Or we could do something truly unthinkable.
We have to talk about the fact that this is now confirmed as the final season for Arcane. An Emmy Award-winning show. Why is it coming to an end like this?
Well, we really just, this was the end we wanted. I think when we started Arcane, we definitely were aware of this. We've all watched TV shows that didn't really know when to stop. And we just said we don't want to be one of those. We want to just tell a very specific story where we have, a very tailored ending in mind. And so this is it. When people ask us, it's like, in hindsight, you never really know where these shows go. And, obviously it was a big success. People really loved it. So maybe we would have done things differently if if we start over. But this is just what we built from the beginning. And so we have to, kind of follow our gut on this and tell the story that it was supposed to be.
A story that overstays its welcome has always been a stain against this legacy, and in recent years, with the advent of on-demand services, serialized storytelling, and the binge culture that birthed from it, overstaying has become something of the norm. From books to movies and video games to TV shows, everything that can be milked to turn a profit almost certainly will be. But this begs the question, what happens when creators choose to step away instead? We'll explore that choice and the role of profits later on. You see, the danger of overstaying lies in the gradual erosion of what made a story impactful in the first place. Characters become caricatures, plots grow convoluted, and audiences, once invested, begin to lose interest. Shows like The Walking Dead and Dexter, movies like the Hobbit trilogy, and the later Terminator films and Resident Evil certainly come to mind. These were stories that started strong but dragged on until their reputations were tarnished. The magic of a story lies in its ability to captivate and resonate, and stretching it thin for the sake of longevity often undermines that magic. This tendency isn't at all surprising when you consider the industry's priorities. In a world where attention spans are currency and IPs are the ultimate asset, the temptation to squeeze every last drop of value from a franchise is immense. Studios, publishers, and networks often find themselves in a cycle of diminishing returns, where each new sequel, spin-off, or reboot chips away at an original's legacy in the pursuit of profit. And yet, it's the ending that often defines how a story is remembered. A well-timed, satisfying conclusion can elevate a series from great to iconic. A story that understands the power of restraint and knows when to stop can leave audiences with a lasting impression rather than a sense of exhaustion. Now, I've not watched season 2 of Squid Game just yet, and I think that's actually a testament to this very point. Right before Arcane first dropped, Squid Game was the reigning king of Netflix, in large part because it ended on a high note. When I watched it, I knew they'd most likely make another season, but honestly, I wasn't certain they should. And based on much of the coverage surrounding the new season, it appears my instincts were correct. When I finished Arcane, however, the final shot left me curious where things would go, because it was so clearly apparent that despite how well the story had been told so far, it wasn't yet finished. But in Squid Game's case, I just got the feeling that it wrapped up so well that to reopen it with the aim of recapturing the magic would only lead to dissatisfaction. Now, I haven't seen it, so I'll reserve judgment, but as I said, that does seem to be something in the headlines, whereas that's not the case with Arcane. See, Arcane was the first part of a two-part story, whereas Squid Game was a singular one. The majority of the conflict we were invested into in Squid Game had been resolved, with the main premise of the show already having served its purpose. So how do you go further than that? Do you retrace your steps from the first season, giving us more of the same, but with none of the freshness and mystery that made its initial outing so compelling? Do you scale up the action and take the conflict to new heights, but then risk losing the appeal the show initially had? Or do you simply do the unthinkable?
I think the other aspect about that also is for us as creatives, we've been on this journey with these characters now in September of 24. It's 9 years for me. I don't know how many people that worked on one thing for 9 years. There's not that many. So it's also, I think we're excited to also dive into the stories of other characters from our game. There's over 160 of them. We've only really explored like 11 of them so far in Arcane. It's also exciting to think about the next stories to tell.
In life, we emphasize the importance of first impressions because we rarely ever have a choice over when our ending will be. But when it comes to stories, we get to decide when and how to end things. And so for storytellers, last impressions are something that need to be considered now more than ever before. Despite the fact Arcane captured the hearts of its audience, so much so it left them pining for a continuation for 3 years, its creators still decided to step away right at the height of its acclaim. A decision that's often lauded as ideal in retrospect, yet ever rarely actually realized in practice. The question inquiring minds really should be asking at this moment is why? Why not make a third season? Well, for starters, because the story of Arcane is finished. When you look at how everything concluded, the question I personally would be asking myself at this moment is where do you go from here? There are no loose ends that demand a continuation. The central arcs like the rivalry between Vi and Jinx, the downfall of Jace and Victor, and the tension between Zon and Piltover, they've all been resolved, even if not in a neat or happy way. To push beyond these moments would risk repeating what's already been said or shifting focus in ways that feel unnatural. See, the question of where you go from here isn't one you ever have to ask yourself if you have everything planned out, but as is too often the case, many times follow-ups aren't thought through and instead come about as a result of demand rather than necessity. Arcane doesn't need a third season, and if it wants its legacy to remain intact, it never will. And honestly, I might be reaching a bit here, but I would go so far as to even say that I think ending Arcane on its second season was also a matter of respecting the story's own themes. The show is built around the consequences of ambition, power, and choices, both good and bad. To stretch the story further would be to betray its own message, falling into the very cycle of overreach it critiques. By ending when they did, the creators aligned their actions with similar lessons to what their own characters learned. But was this an act purely born of creative integrity? Or does the brushstroke of reality paint a different picture? Could it be that beneath the surface lies a more practical truth?
I mean, I have to talk about some of the layoffs that happened at Riot. And one of the reasons was, given at the time, was to focus more on the games. Has that affected your plans going forward?
Not really. I mean, we've always been a pretty small part of Riot. The company, I think at this point still is over 4,000 people. I think our team is like 20. So, we're a really small part of that. Look, it's a very difficult and defining time in the video game industry. I think the pandemic had everyone just kind of think, oh, I guess everyone's just going to stay at home forever and play games all day, and that'll surely not change at all. So I think I think the industry just had to wake up. That was really painful. But I think it also just raised some very important questions, which is like, what are we actually doing? What are we actually focusing on? What do we actually have to say as an industry that suddenly the whole world's paying attention to? And we just need to have really good answers. So as much as this was really painful to see a lot of friends and coworkers no longer work at the same company that they've been part of for such a long time alongside you, I think it's also just necessary that we as an industry, we ask ourselves, like what is the future, and do we have the focus that we need to truly create great stuff and not just more of the same.
In the process of me making this video, I discovered some harsh realities about Arcane and Riot Games that I didn't know before. See, I was intending on making this entire video be about how despite making a boatload of money, the creators opted out, trading riches for risk. So you can imagine I was a little surprised when I discovered that upon its conclusion, Arcane had been considered a financial miss. Arcane is the most expensive animated series ever produced, with a reported budget of $250 million across its 2 seasons. For Riot Games, a company whose expertise lies in video games, this was a monumental risk. And while the show was a critical darling, the financial returns didn't quite match its acclaim. Licensing deals with platforms like Netflix didn't cover the full cost, and despite a surge in interest, League of Legends itself didn't see the player boom Riot might have hoped for. Now, it should be noted that the $250 million wasn't exclusively dedicated to the actual animation of the show, as Mark Merrill explained in an interview with IO9. He says, first of all, the $250 million headline is not even accurate because that includes marketing expenses. The actual creation budget is significantly less than that. Now, even with that clarification, Arcane is still amongst one of the most expensive shows, animated or otherwise, to ever be created, and the fact remains it ultimately didn't recoup even half of its budget, let alone come anywhere close to turning a profit. But it's also been said that November was one of Riot's most highest grossing revenue periods ever, and that Season 2 is projected to at least break even. Now, between you and me, we can understand how many of our favourite things in media aren't always the most financially fruitful, but the problem is often the suits behind these creations don't feel the same. And rather than recognising the brand benefits stories like Arcane can create, they'll usually discard and dismiss it as little more than a failed investment. This is where Arcane is fortunately set apart because Riot themselves were willing to fund the entire project specifically to avoid a lack of creative control, and no doubt to avoid the consequences they otherwise would have faced in this exact scenario. Now, although I do believe the show was always intended to be 2 parts, I also can very easily believe Riot wasn't too upset about putting a pin in things, knowing the show wasn't giving League of Legends the monetary explosion they were shooting for. I recall in my last video I made about Arcane, I even said myself that I have no interest in playing League despite being an avid gamer and loving the show. So I can imagine for people who not only don't play video games, but especially ones like League, the appeal would be even less. In my opinion, the smartest thing for them to do at this point would be to branch out and create more narrative heavy video games set in the world of Runeterra. And if they have any sense, I'm sure that's exactly what they plan on doing. An RPG or story-driven action-adventure game, preferably available on consoles, would most likely be of far greater appeal to those of us invested in the characters of this setting. Making it available on more gaming platforms would only widen access and appeal, and if they bring the same degree of passion and love they have to it as they did Arcane, they could stand to create not only a beloved video game, but also a profitable one. And if the words Mark Merrill shared on Reddit are anything to go by, then perhaps my hopes for such passion to be carried forward aren't in vain. He said, "People who look to the world through a short-term, transactional, cynical lens really struggle to understand Riot. This has been true with various people trying to claim that high quality free games won't work, that esports will never work, that our music was insane, are now saying that Arcane wasn't awesome and worth it. These people think we make things like Arcane to sell skins, when in reality we sell skins to make things like Arcane. Riot is a mission driven company where rioters are constantly striving to make it better to be a player. That is why we have successfully done that over and over again across multiple games and now multiple businesses, mediums, games, sports, music and animation. Do we get everything right? Nope, but we are not focused on the short-term extraction of profits. We are focused on delivering exceptional value to our audience over the long term, again and again and again. To be clear, Arcane crushed for players and so it crushed for us. As a self-proclaimed pragmatist with the heart of an artist, every single word here rings true for me. The notion of selling skins to make things like Arcane is a beautifully poetic sentiment, one that frames Arcane as a labour of love rather than simply a cash grab. But it also reveals a truth about the business of art that is all too easily forgotten in the midst of this. Everything, even something as beautiful as Arcane, must justify its place within a larger ecosystem. And when that justification wanes, hard choices must be made. This is the duality of Arcane's ending. On one hand, it stands as a testament to Riot's respect for storytelling, an example of stepping away to preserve a legacy. On the other hand, it's a reminder that even the most ambitious projects are beholden to the realities of budget sheets and boardrooms. It's this delicate balance between art and commerce that defines not just Arcane, but the landscape of modern media. And yet, does this make the decision any less admirable? If anything, it enhances it, because knowing when to end isn't just a creative decision, it's also a practical one. It requires an understanding of limits, of what a story can achieve and what an audience will remember. When I look at Arcane, every aspect of it, from its captivating characters to its incredible soundtrack and of course its utterly astonishing animation, it's ridiculous to believe that this had anything less than heart poured into it. The reality is, it's a miracle the show even exists to begin with. And the fact that Riot still plans on creating even more shows in other regions of Runeterra is proof that they understand that a good return on investment isn't solely about the money you make today, but about the reputation and legacy you leave behind for tomorrow. One of the hardest things for a prospective storyteller to do is simply start, but the often overlooked challenge right at the other end of it is ending things. The courage to step away, to conclude a story or a chapter of our lives on our own terms is what truly defines mastery, both in storytelling and in life. Whatever the full reasons behind it are, Arcane remains an example of this rare and powerful decision, showing us that sometimes the greatest act of creation is knowing when to stop.